Hi guys, it's Ali from JCW Ventures, and in this video I'm going to go over the N14 and N18 engine that is found in Minis. Obviously this engine is found in other cars, but generally first I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a history on the engine, why it developed and why it is used in was used in BMW Mini cars. So I'm just going to first off going to go over the actual engine, the code name for the engine and the family of the engine basically is called a Prince engine. Basically it was designed to be a straightforward engine co-developed basically with PSA Group, which is Peugeot and Citroen. BMW and Mini brought in their pool as well of resources. So the principle was to develop a compact engine which will range between a 1.4 and 1.6, which either be naturally aspirated or turbocharged. Obviously this video is naturally going to focus on the turbocharged units, which are the N14 and N18 engine found in BMWs and Minis. Basically, it was designed to get all these car brands, their resources and their knowledge, pool it all together, develop an engine. That way, that would reduce cost and lead times actually developing a whole new engine, so we could share each other's knowledge. So the idea was to bring modern fuel injection, turbocharging. BMW brought to the table their variable valve timing, which is known as VANOS, and on-demand oil and water pumps. So what happened there, guys, the engine's components were produced by the PSA Group, which is Peugeot and Citroen, in Dorval in France, and the engine would essentially be assembled in Hams Hall in Birmingham, which is BMW and Mini's engine assembly plant. So the cooperation was officially announced in 23rd of July in 2002, with the first engines actually being produced in 2006. So now that I've given you guys an overview of why the engine was produced and where it's produced, a quick side note as well, the engine was meant to go into another car brand, but obviously that came to fruition. So basically in September, 29th of September 2010, it was announced that BMW was going to share the N14 engine, so the 1.6 turbo version of the Prince engine would be supplied to Saab from 2012. Sadly, it was going to go into the Saab 9-3. However, obviously Saab, they collapsed, and obviously that closure of supply never happened because obviously Saab went under during that time. It was naturally going to provide a 1.6 turbo engine, which have gone into their 4-door, 5-door sedan basically, which they used to develop at that given time. So now that's sort of going over the various brands that the engine did go in. So these are the actual physical car brands the engine did actually go into. So Peugeot were the first out of the group, out of the PSA Group and BMW Mini's alliance. So they used the N14 engine between 2006 and 2014. It did have various states of tune. Obviously they didn't call it the N14 or N18 engine. They had a different internal code name, and that was called the EP6DDT, and there was an EP6DTS. The S at the end is stating the higher horsepower engines. So the engine was basically used in anything from a Peugeot 207 to their RCZ, sort of a TT, cheap poor man's TT basically. They did update the engine later on to its life. They did update the engine for Euro 6 emission laws, and then when they did turn out the power, significantly. So obviously the highest state of tune the Mini had the engine was 218 brake horsepower in the Mini GP2, but they took it even further. So they took it to 250 bhp and 270 bhp. So that was either available in the Peugeot 308 GTI or in the Peugeot CRZ, and then 270 brake horsepower, the R version basically of that. So that allowed that car to hit 0-60 in 5.9 seconds flat. In order to sort of gain them sort of levels of power in the highest state of tune of 270 brake horsepower, what they did to the engine block, they reinforced the engine block. They gave operated turbo, operated exhaust manifolds, stronger cod rods, and new forward pistons. This is all partnership and developed with Manhal Motorsport. That allowed the engine to sort of still pass all the emission laws and do everything that they needed to do, and obviously run a higher state of power and not have any issues with the engine. So then moving on to the next brand within the group, so Citroen, they used the engine, and actually they're still using the same engine now. a latter updated version of, so we say their own version, so their N18 engine basically. So they ran the engine from 2008 and still using it to this day, and that went into various cars in their lineup. So everything from the humble Citroen C4 to their upper brand marketing, sub-brand basically called DS series. So that's basically, if you think about it, if you think of Toyota, they have Lexus, so they're higher end sort of side of things. Citroen did the same thing as well. So obviously, like engine sharing is sort of similar, and everyone does it now. So argument's sake, Aston Martin do it with Mercedes. They borrow their V8 engines to beat emission laws and everything like that. So same principle used here again. So then if we then leave that sort of brand, they didn't do much with the engine. They sort of left it how it is. Obviously they updated stuff just to pass emissions, but later on they didn't really turn up the wick on sort of power wise, but even when they did, sort of borrowed it more on the Peugeot side. So they did get like 250, 270 brake horsepower engines. They shared it with Peugeot. So similar engine, so no point in developing the engine themselves. On the Citroen standpoint of view, they let Peugeot carry the weight and that development basically. Then if you sort of move on to the Mini brand, so they used the engine in 2007 and to 2011, so specifically the N14 engine. So that was in everything between the Cooper S and JCW variants. So that was in the hatch to the Paceman at that given time. So then in 2012 sort of time, around that model year when they did facelifting the Mini as well, around 2011, the N18 engine came along, fixing some of the issues in the N14 engine. Obviously, so everything from during that period of time, the Coupe came out and the Roadster came out, so they were the defining sort of cars that got the first N18 engines. Obviously later on down the line, the Countryman coming out and the Paceman. Them kind of variants, they gained the N18 engine as well. And then so the highest state of tune, we were introduced to the Mini GP2 basically. So that ran between 2012 2014, and that actually had additional performance. So it had 218 bhp, so small changes there. So they had a larger turbo and different engine internals, and the cylinder lining heads, they had some plasma material added to reduce friction. A lot of time GPs that were sort of rated at 218 bhp, so there was some fluctuation there. So some stock GP2s actually running 230. I guess that's due to less friction in the cylinders and having that larger in turbo in the internals basically side of things. So then we sort of carry on with the same sort of brand as well. BMW, obviously the parent company, they used a 1.6 engine as well. So they didn't call it the N14 or the N18. Basically internally BMW side, they called it the N13. So basically the idea of that engine was to replace, they had it BMW, which was their naturally aspirated BMW N43 engine. So that engine was produced between the N13 basically was produced between 2011 and 2016. And the cars that sort of gained that engine basically were the 1 Series, so ran between 2012 and 2016, so the F20 shape. So that was available in the 114i, the 116i, 118i and the 120i. And then on the 3 Series size, so the F30 series, so between 2012 and 2015, so that was everything in the 11316i and the 320i efficiency dynamic. So yeah, that engine was ran in the BMWs for a while as well. Obviously I know the N14 did get a bad rep, but during that time it won a fair few awards. 8 years on the trot, it won the International Engine Year of the Award between the 1.4 and 1.8 category. So 8 years is a long period to win an award basically. So that ran everything up to 2014. They won that award with the engine. And obviously naturally the N14 N18 engine was replaced. So the production of the Prince Enzi family ended in 2013, and it was replaced in the Mini family and the BMW range to various 3-cylinder and 4-cylinder engines. So they were given eternal code names of the B36, B38 and the B48. So obviously B36 36 being the lower displacement, so the 3 cylinders, and the 4 and 6 moving on to the 4-cylinder engines. So yeah, the new shape of Minis, the F56 generation, should we say the F series, they gained the new BMW engines basically, and the N14 N18 was later S basically, as they closed chapter on the second generation of Mini. So now that I've sort of ran over the history of the N14 N18 engine, so given the various brands that the engine was used in, so that gave conclusion. So obviously now the engine is still being used by Citroen Group, but the Peugeot and BMW and Mini, they sort of dropped the engine and moved on with life. Obviously BMW replacing them with their own internal engines and not sharing the platform engine again, so that's later S. So now I'm just going to go over the N14 engine in the Mini brand only and show you the different variations between the N14 and N18 engine. Naturally, to Cooper S and JCW gains the engines, the N14 engine basically between 2007 and 2011. So that was in various states of tune. So they had the 271 bhp engine in the Cooper S and the 208 brake horsepower engine in the JCW. Obviously they shared the same sort of internals of some variations. Obviously they had the similar things that they had was the single Vanos. So that was on the intake only. Obviously it ran a Siemens DME unit, which is the MED 17.2. So that was the engine management system basically. Obviously the Cooper S ran the line. Obviously then the JCW came along, the full factory one basically. That developed 208 bhp, and obviously that was the highest state of tune and highest state of power was done by uprated turbocharger, larger bore exhaust, a lightened crankshaft and reinforced pistons. And obviously that was then given a different type of map that allowed the JCW basically to have a 0-60 time of 6.4 seconds, where the Cooper S with the lowest state of tune of 171 bhp, that only could crack 0-60 in 7.2. Obviously the emissions were up. Yes, during that time the Cooper S did get the JCW kit, but that only bumped up the power up. So that was done via an official Mini intake, so you got the different intake, and then the power was increased by Mini actually mapping the car as well with software. So that allowed the bhp to go up to 192 bhp. So then yeah, with that kit you still got the Mini warranty that came with that, so then it was certified by Mini, but obviously vice versa. I know people have gone around and mapping them and everything like that, but obviously Mini was the only person offering the official kit that allowed N14 to boost up on the power on the Cooper S to go to near on JCW levels. But obviously JCW having different internals, everything allowed a bit more safer power to be given, but obviously Mini gave their warranty with the JCW kit on the Cooper S's. So from that sort of life cycle as well, the N14 was given a rest. So when Mini did their LCI, basically what LCI means is like a facelift within the brand to bring the car up, to give it more life refresh, so get people more into the brand. Or if they are on a finance front, or if they change their car every 3 to 4 years, this allowed them to go back in the same car with various improvements. So what LCI stand for is life cycle impulse. That is basically a facelift, as I explained before. So with that facelift came the N18 engine. Like myself, I've got a facelift car, but I'm running the N14 engine. So sometimes when you do buy a facelift car, there is a chance, like myself, where you got the N14 engine. So basically what happened during that time, so there's a lot of N14 engines going on still up there. They hadn't ramped up the production in the N18 engine fully, so a lot of the launch cars like the Coupe and the Roadster at the time, some of them did gains, and the Hatch and the rest, various other brands lineup in there, they gained the N14 engine, but they were facelift car with the old engine. Sometimes it's pot luck. I still enjoy my N14 engine. I still love mine to bits, so no sort of hard feelings there on my side of things. So yeah, so some people gained the N18 engine. So with that came various changes. So on the Cooper S side of things, they actually gained more horsepower, because they were up 10 bhp on that part. So they ran up to 181 bhp, up from the 171 bhp. JCW powers officially were still the same, but various cars that have been in dyno that I've personally seen myself, they've ramped up to somewhere between 220 brake horsepower or 230. So it's a bit of pot luck whether you get a higher horsepower or it stays to the official levels of 208 and 211 bhp. With that went across the whole range. So the Coupe and the Roadster launched the N18 engine, so then the Countryman followed suit, and the Paceman, the Clubman and the rest of the range, the Hatch and the Convertible, they all gained that same engine. With that, the Vanos system was actually changed, so we went to a double Vanos. So that allowed better mapping basically of airflow within the engine, so they could produce better power. So that's why the Cooper S basically gained more horsepower. But then officially the JCW didn't really gain any horsepower, it stayed the same. But like I said to you before, for various other people that I've seen, owners across the world, in the UK, they're actually running more horsepower than the stated 211. So then with that, the oil pump was then map controlled, so there actually being a pump that sort of pumped itself within the system. The variable valve timing, that came a 3-phase servo motor. It was integrated within the shaft sensor within the engine. The camshaft construction, that can change to a composite, and there was a new piston design, and that allowed more horsepower again. And obviously there was a variation with them, various engine changes as well with the Vanos and everything. A different Siemens DME unit was used, so that gained the control unit of a EMVD 17.2.2. So running with that covers the actual internal changes that we sort of physically within the engine. So now I'm just going to go over the changes that we essentially see, and some that will give positive outcomes of what the N14 engine faults were with their inherent design. So what happened, they changed the positive crankcase ventilation, so the PVC in short. That was basically the way the oil gases ventilated throughout the engine. So what the idea was, they updated it before to reduce the carbon buildup. So instead of that oil cooling down where it shouldn't do, they updated the design so it didn't cause that, basically, instead of recycling it. So what they did basically, the vacuum line is now internal to the valve cover. This reduced all the spooling of that intake gas in the intake manifold, so that reduced coking. And the boost line between the valve cover and the turbo pipe is now changed as well, slight variation in that. To sort of tell an N14 N18 engine straight away off the bat, the N18 has actually got a cosmetic cover on the valve cover, so that covers the spark plug ignitions and the coil pack basically. Where the N14 is a bit more exposed, you can just see it straight away. And N18 added a small heat shield on the turbo oil feed line to mitigate any coking in the line. So that's off the bat. But then N14 engine owners, basically, there was a recall, more of an enhancement product line by Mini. They did a recall on N14 engines to give that oil feed line protection as well, so that's free of charge. If your Mini hasn't got that, and then the N14 engine, I suggest you go into a Mini dealer and get that done. It's a free upgrade to the engine. Another sort of visual upgrade you'll probably see over an N14 engine is the turbo intake pipe. And the N18 is actually rigid, so it's solid, opposed to the N14, which the intake pipe, it's actually a flexible pipe. So, another one reason why some of the turbo lag is actually reduced on an N18 engine, the noisemaker was deleted. So basically what a noisemaker is on the N14 engine, basically is pumping some of the engine noise into the cabin. So obviously with that, it reduces the airflow, basically increasing turbo lag, but it allowed the cabin to have a bit more noise basically, so you got more thing. With that, getting rid of that, basically that noisemaker delete on the N18 engine, that allowed it to have reduced turbo lag. So there's actually, when you drive an N18 compared to an N14 engine, the turbo lag is actually reduced. There's a delivery of a smoother power level delivery with the engine. On the N14 engines, you can do that delete yourself. There is various brands, so you can do the noisemaker delete. So there's official mini part you can buy and add that to the engine bay, or you can go down the silicone hose routes. There's various brands like Forge, just coming off the top of my head, they make a noisemaker delete pipe. It's about £60 or £80, depending where you can find it, and sort of eliminates that turbo lag, so you don't get the noise in the cabin for the N18 engine. So in the N18 engines, or an owner with that kind of engine in their Mini, they don't need to do that. N14 engines, if you want to gain a bit more, reduce the turbo lag, is probably the route to go down to. Again, the intake airbox is slightly different because the different mountings. The JCW intake will not fit now. So argument's sake, if you had an N14 Cooper S and you wanted to get the JCW airbox, you can do that on the N14 engine. But then if you went to an N18 engine and you want to shove a JCW airbox, it's not possible due to the different mountings there. There's variation. With that slight step backwards as well, was the N18 dipstick. For the love of me, I don't know why Mini didn't use the Cooper S all dipsticks, because they were a bit more readable. Both hard to read again, and this time around it was one of the final changes as well. On demand, when you went to the sport button on the N18 engine, pops and burbles to the exhaust were added. So where an N14 engine will just do it off the bat itself, when you go in sport mode it's a bit more prevalent, the popping and banging. But with an N18 engine, if it's not in sport mode, it will not pop and bang. There is a little fruitiness to the exhaust note, but when you specifically add the sport button on, or you turn it on, basically you get the pops and bangs, and you can sort of feel it with the N18 engine. It's that engine that wants to pop and bang freely like the N14, but when you shove it in sport mode, you can sort of feel that it's kind of programmed in, and you sort of feel like it will pop 3 times on quick concession, so you can sort of tell it's a bit more artificial when the engine pops and bangs, basically. So now then, guys, I've sort of given a overview of the N14 and N18 engine in. Obviously, people prefer both engines for various reasons. Obviously, if you want less trouble for your driving, an N18 engine is probably better for yourself. If you're a bit more into tinkering, or a bit off top of stuff, the N14 is still a strong engine, as I sort of gone on before in my previous video. But it depends on what kind of user you are. Yes, an N14 engine is probably the cheaper car to buy, where the N18s command a higher price. But then it's like anything, if it's been looked after, it will look after you. The fuel pumps still sort of plague both engines as well. They tend to go as well. The timing chain stuff is still there, but it's less prevalent. But then again, the N18 engines haven't been out there that long compared to the N14 engine. So the N14 engine is now quite old, given it's a 2007 thing. Well, like I said to you, over time with technology that did change, so 2011, 2012. So there's a 5-year age difference. As the cars ages, we'll see various maybe possible problems arise, but hopefully, fingers crossed, they don't come across. But then that, yeah. So there, guys, there goes my overview, the N14 and N18 engines, basically the various applications and the brands that did actually share that engine. So hopefully, it gives you insight. There'll be more videos along the lines about how to maintain a car and N14 engines, various other things that I'll go through over the Mini brands. But if there's anything that you do want to know, drop questions in the comments. I'll happily answer them. Or if there's any buying advice that you do need to know, or this is just a factual thing and you liked it, you want me to bring more videos, subscribe to the channel so I can produce more content for you guys. Happy to do it. Vice versa, when we do sort of move out of lockdown, there'll be a lot more engagement side of me physically going and seeing various owners, a bit more detail into the car, showing the various modifications that you can do over time. And obviously, naturally, there will be blog posts on my website, so JCW Ventures. So please continue supporting the channel. I want to grow it. I want the channel to be a real thing for Mini owners or possible owners of different brand that use the N14 N18 engine, so they can gain the information that I'm sort of reading. So thank you, guys. Until next time, guys, it's always a Mini adventure.